ballroom was bright, elegant, and full of witnesses. On the stage, Ronald Brooks smiled into the microphone and turned his anniversary speech into a warning disguised as humor. He spoke about sacrifice, about who really paid for success, then let the punchline land on his wife. Laughter rippled. Phones lifted. Silence followed her. Lauren Brooks didn't interrupt. She didn't explain. She didn't defend herself. What no one in that room knew, what Ronald had never bothered to confirm, was already locked into a signed contract, a completed wire transfer, and a venue ledger marked paid in full. Not under his name. The humiliation was public. The truth was already documented. And the ending was never going to belong to the man holding the microphone. If you believe dignity matters more than volume, stay with this story until the end. Tell us where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. And if Quiet Strength deserves a platform, consider subscribing, so stories like this keep being told. The anniversary everyone came to see had been months in the making. Though only one of them had truly been preparing, Lauren Brooks had learned long ago that celebrations were less about joy than they were about coordination. Joy arrived or didn't on its own terms. Coordination, however, could be controlled. It was why she kept lists, why she saved emails, why she never trusted memory when documentation could do the job better. The ballroom, now glowing with soft gold light, had once been an empty shell on her screen, rendered in high-resolution photos and floor plans sent by Dana Whitmore, the venue's events manager. Lauren remembered sitting at the small desk in the spare bedroom, laptop open, calendar blocked, phone silent. She had read the contract line by line, not because she enjoyed it, but because she believed in understanding the shape of commitments before stepping into them. She had signed her name neatly at the bottom. Lauren Brooks. Then she had wired the deposit. Across the apartment, Ronald Brooks had been on a call that night. Pacing with his phone pressed to his ear, voice pitched low but urgent. He spoke often about momentum, about how things were about to turn, how visibility mattered, how perception could open doors that effort alone could not. Lauren listened from the doorway without interrupting. She had learned that interruptions only slowed men like Ronald down, without changing their direction. When he ended the call, he smiled at her, the way people smiled when they wanted affirmation, without asking for it. "Big year," he'd said. "We should do something memorable." Lauren had nodded. She already was. Now, months later, guests flowed into the ballroom, dressed in tailored suits and carefully chosen dresses, each arrival announced by the low murmur of recognition. The Brooks anniversary had become a social marker, something people mentioned at work, something others hoped to be invited to. Ronald had encouraged that. He liked the idea of the night preceding him. Lauren stood near the entrance for a moment, watching the room. Fill the way a stage manager watches before the lights come up. She noticed details others didn't. The way the place cards sat perfectly aligned, the way the waitstaff moved in rehearsed arcs, the way the lighting softened faces without hiding them. Everything was functioning as designed. Ronald entered last on purpose. He wore a dark suit that fit him better than most things in his life. He paused just long enough for heads to turn, for conversations to slow. Lauren watched him accept handshakes, claps on the shoulder, laughter that leaned a little too close. He was good at this. He always had been. Patricia Brooks arrived shortly after him, her presence sharper, more deliberate. She took in the room with a quick, assessing glance, then turned to Lauren with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Well," Patricia said, gesturing around them. "This is ambitious." Lauren returned the smile, polite and contained. It came together. Patricia hummed as though filing the comment away. I suppose when Ronald puts his mind to something, the sentence didn't require completion. Lauren let it sit. Melissa Grant appeared moments later, already laughing at something Ronald had said, her hand resting lightly on his arm in a way that suggested familiarity without intimacy. She wore confidence easily, another skill Lauren recognized without envying. "This place is incredible," Melissa said, turning to Lauren. "You must be exhausted." Lauren tilted her head slightly. "Not anymore." Melissa laughed, not hearing the difference. As the evening settled into motion, Lauren drifted to the edges of conversations, listening more than speaking. She had always preferred observation to participation. From the periphery, patterns became visible. Ronald's laugh changed depending on who he was facing. Patricia corrected details before anyone asked. Melissa subtly redirected attention when it wandered away from Ronald. And Ronald soaked it in. He spoke about work with broad strokes, careful never to name numbers or specifics that could be questioned. He framed the evening as a celebration of resilience, of partnership, of building something together. People nodded. People raised glasses. The room reflected back exactly what he wanted to see. Lauren remained quiet. Her phone rested in her clutch screen, dark. Not because there were no messages, there had been several, but because she understood timing. There was one email in particular she hadn't opened yet, though she already knew what it would say. She could picture Dana Whitmore's precise phrasing, the professional warmth, final balance received. Thank you for trusting us with your event. Lauren would open it later. Evidence didn't expire. The photographer, Jason Miller, moved through the room with unobtrusive efficiency, capturing moments without disrupting them. Lauren noticed how he positioned himself whenever Ronald spoke, how he waited for reactions rather than poses. She made a mental note of his vantage points. Dinner was served. Speeches were teased. Anticipation built the way it always did before something unscripted threatened to happen. Ronald leaned toward Lauren at their table, his voice low. "You okay?" He asked the question performative more than concerned. Lauren met his eyes. "Of course." He smiled, satisfied, and turned back to the crowd. From the stage, the microphone waited. Lauren felt the shift before it occurred. A tightening in the room, subtle but unmistakable. Ronald was about to claim the night fully. Patricia straightened in her chair. Melissa angled her phone just enough to record. Lauren adjusted nothing. She took a slow breath and let it out quietly. This was the part no one else had prepared for. She thought again of the contract, of the clean digital signature, of the wire confirmation, saved to a folder labeled simply Anniversary Venue. She thought of the bank statement she had downloaded and backed up twice. She thought of how easily truth could be drowned out by confidence until it couldn't. The lights dimmed slightly. Applause rose as Ronald stood and made his way toward the stage, already nodding as if in agreement with praise that hadn't yet been given. Lauren watched him go, her expression calm, her posture unchanged. The story everyone believed was about to be told. The story that mattered had already been written. Months earlier, long before the ballroom lights and the applause rehearsed themselves into existence, Lauren Brooks had sat alone, with the decision that would quietly define the night. It was a Tuesday evening, ordinary enough to be forgettable. Ronald was late again, caught in what he called one of those stretches at work periods that demanded more dinners out, more last-minute meetings, more vague assurances that everything was about to stabilize. Lauren didn't question him. She had learned that questions invited performances, not answers. Instead, she opened her laptop. The venue had been on a short list. Lauren curated herself, not because it was the most extravagant, but because it was efficient. The space had history without being heavy elegance, without unnecessary ornamentation. Most importantly, it came with a management team that responded promptly and wrote clearly. Dana Whitmore's first email had arrived less than an hour after Lauren's inquiry. "Thank you for reaching out. I'd be happy to discuss availability and options." Lauren appreciated that Dana asked questions before making assumptions. Guest count, preferred layout, budget range not in numbers, but in priorities. Lauren answered them all carefully, attaching a draft guest list she'd been refining in private for weeks. When the proposal arrived, Lauren reviewed it the way she reviewed everything else, slowly, without emotion. She didn't wince at the total. She'd already done the math. What made her pause wasn't the cost, but the timing. Ronald's accounts had been inconsistent lately. Small delays, excuses that sounded rehearsed even to him. Lauren had noticed charges shifted between cards balances paid late, then early, the quiet choreography of someone managing appearance while avoiding scrutiny. She didn't confront him. Confrontation was loud, and noise didn't fix structural problems. So she made a choice. Lauren replied to Dana confirming the date. She asked for the contract. The agreement was straightforward. Deposit due within 5 business days. Remaining balance due 2 weeks before the event. Cancellation clauses spelled out cleanly. Lauren signed without ceremony. Then she logged into her bank account and initiated the wire transfer. Her name appeared exactly once on the confirmation screen. She screenshot it. She downloaded the receipt. She saved both to a folder, then backed that folder up to a secure drive she rarely thought about afterward. When Ronald came home that night, he glanced at the open laptop and smiled. "You're really leaning into this anniversary thing, huh?" Lauren looked up from her screen. "It's important to you." He laughed, softly relieved. "It is. I want it to mean something." "It will," she said. He didn't ask how. He didn't ask who had paid. He accepted the idea of the evening the way people accepted gifts they assumed had always been theirs. Over the next few weeks, Lauren handled the details quietly. She coordinated menus, reviewed seating arrangements, approved lighting mock-ups. Dana copied her on every update, addressed every message to Lauren directly. The communication chain was clean, consistent, and unmistakable. Ronald never once asked to be added to the emails. He spoke about the party often, though. At dinners with colleagues, at family gatherings, and conversations Lauren overheard from the other room. He framed it as a milestone proof that things were moving forward, that they were finally where they should be. Sometimes he joked about how much work it was. Other times he hinted that he had pulled a few strings. Lauren let him. The second payment went out exactly on schedule. Lauren set a calendar reminder for herself and executed the transfer the moment it appeared. She didn't delay. She didn't hesitate. She didn't tell anyone. Dana responded with a brief confirmation and a note of appreciation. "Everything is on track. Looking forward to hosting you." The simplicity of it comforted Lauren. There was no drama in paperwork that was handled properly. As the date approached, Ronald's behavior shifted. He became more animated, more self-assured. He practiced remarks aloud while tying his tie, glancing at his reflection as if the mirror might object. Lauren listened from the doorway, offering no feedback unless asked. Once he paused mid-sentence and turned to her. "You think this is too much?" Lauren considered the question. "For whom?" He smiled, reassured. "Exactly. Patricia Brooks called frequently, inserting herself into decisions she hadn't been invited to make. She questioned color schemes, guest lists, even the choice of venue. It's bold," Patricia had said during one call. "I just hope we're not overreaching." Lauren kept her voice neutral. "The arrangements are confirmed." That ended the discussion. By the time the final confirmation email arrived, subject line: "Final invoice paid in full." Lauren felt no surge of pride or anticipation, only a sense of closure, the kind that came from finishing something properly. She forwarded the message to her private archive and flagged it. On the night of the event, as guests filled the room and Ronald moved effortlessly between conversations, Lauren stood briefly near the bar and glanced at her phone. She opened Dana's email, at last read it once, then locked the screen. Across the room, Ronald was telling a story to a small group, his voice rising at the punchline. Laughter followed. Melissa leaned in closer. Patricia nodded approvingly. Lauren watched them all with the calm clarity of someone who knew where the foundations lay. The venue wasn't a favor. The night wasn't a gift. And the truth wasn't fragile. It had been paid for in full, long before anyone had started keeping score. As the evening deepened, the ballroom settled into a rhythm that felt effortless on the surface and carefully engineered beneath it. Servers moved in synchronized patterns, placing glasses and clearing plates without interrupting conversation. The lighting softened further, casting a flattering glow that blurred small imperfections and encouraged people to lean closer, speak more freely. Lauren Brooks noticed everything. She noticed how Ronald positioned himself at the center of each cluster of guests, how his laughter arrived half a beat after everyone else's just long enough to seem generous. She noticed how Patricia Brooks drifted from table to table, gathering reactions, correcting details before anyone realized there had been something to correct. And she noticed the small humiliations delivered quietly enough to be dismissed as misunderstandings. At one table, Patricia leaned toward a couple Lauren barely knew and said with a conspiratorial smile, "Ronald insisted on handling most of this himself. You know how he is always taking care of things." Lauren stood close enough to hear it. She didn't respond. Patricia glanced at her, searching for a reaction, then turned away when none came. At another moment, Melissa Grant joined Lauren near the bar, her tone warm, almost intimate. "You must be so proud of him," she said, nodding toward Ronald. "This kind of event, it really says something." Lauren met her gaze. "It says what it needs to." Melissa laughed lightly as if Lauren had made a joke. "Well, whatever the case, it's impressive. These venues aren't cheap," No Lauren agreed. That was all she said. The photographer Jason Miller paused briefly near them, adjusting his camera settings. Lauren noticed the way he angled his lens not toward the stage, but toward the reactions around it, toward the people who assumed they were unobserved. She wondered briefly how much of the night would live on in still frames and raw footage stripped of the stories people would later tell themselves about it. Dinner concluded with a soft swell of music. Glasses clinked. Someone called for a toast. Ronald raised his hand, already half standing, as if the cue had been waiting for him. Before he reached the microphone, Lauren's phone vibrated gently in her clutch. She didn't look at it immediately. Timing, she reminded herself, mattered. When she did glance down, the subject line appeared exactly as she had predicted. "Final balance confirmed. Thank you, Lauren." The email was brief, professional, precise. Dana Whitmore had a talent for clarity. Lauren read it once, then closed it without replying. She slid the phone back into her clutch, the weight of it unchanged. Across the room, Ronald had reached the stage. The applause that greeted him was warm and uncritical. Patricia straightened in her chair. Melissa lifted her phone, already recording. Lauren remained seated. Ronald began the way he always did, with gratitude that centered himself. He thanked friends, colleagues, family. He spoke about partnership, about resilience, about how we don't always see the work that goes into moments like this. Heads nodded, smiles spread. Then slowly he shifted. "I've learned something over the years," he said, chuckling. "If you don't watch the details, things can get expensive." A ripple of laughter followed. Lauren felt it then, the slight tightening in her chest, not from fear, but from recognition. This was the turn, the part of the story he had rehearsed alone. Ronald continued. "Some people are very good at spending money," he said, glancing briefly in Lauren's direction. "Not everyone understands what it takes to earn it." The laughter came again, louder this time. A few guests exchanged glances, uncertain whether they were meant to laugh or stay quiet. Phones remained raised. Lauren did not move. Ronald smiled, emboldened by the reaction. "But that's marriage, right?" he added. "You learn, you adapt, you pick up the slack." He raised his glass to lessons learned. Applause followed, uneven and delayed. Lauren stood slowly, smoothing the front of her dress with deliberate calm. She did not look at Ronald. She did not look at Patricia. She did not look at Melissa or the phones or the faces that would later replay the moment in fragments. She walked toward the side corridor that led to the administrative offices, her heels steady against the polished floor. Behind her, the room buzzed, confusion layered over entertainment, discomfort disguised as politeness. Dana Whitmore was standing near the service entrance, tablet in hand, her expression tight with professional restraint. When she saw Lauren approach, she straightened. "Miss Brooks," Dana said quietly. Lauren met her eyes. "I'll need a copy of the final invoice for my records." Dana nodded without hesitation. "Of course. I can email it to you right now." "That would be perfect," Lauren said. There was no accusation in her tone, no urgency, just procedure. Dana tapped quickly on her tablet. "You should have it within the minute." Lauren's phone vibrated again. She glanced down, confirming the attachment had arrived. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. Jason Miller passed them on his way back toward the ballroom, camera lowered now. His eyes flicked briefly toward Lauren, then away, professional as ever. "Everything okay?" he asked the question neutral. "Yes," Lauren replied. "Thank you." She stepped into the quiet of the corridor, the noise of the party muffled behind her. For the first time that evening, she allowed herself a full breath. The humiliation had been public. That much was undeniable. But humiliation was temporary. Records were not. Lauren opened her phone and began organizing what she already had. She labeled the invoice. She saved the email thread. She took note of the time. She did not cry. She did not shake. She understood now that the night had crossed a threshold. What had been a private imbalance had been made public by Ronald himself. He had chosen the audience. He had chosen the stage. And in doing so, he had made something else inevitable. From the ballroom, laughter rose again, too loud, too forced. Ronald was still talking. Patricia was still smiling. Melissa was still recording. Lauren closed her phone and slipped it back into her clutch. She would return to the room in a moment. She would sit. She would smile if necessary. She would let the night finish unfolding as it had been set in motion. But the narrative had already shifted. Not with a confrontation, not with a raised voice, with documentation. The microphone had a way of changing Ronald Brooks. Lauren had seen it before, though never this clearly. The slight lift of his shoulders, the steadier cadence of his voice. The way his eyes scanned the room, not to connect, but to measure attention as currency silence, as approval. He stood beneath the lights, as if they were affirmations. Anniversaries, Ronald said, pausing just long enough for the room to settle, are about reflection, about honesty. Lauren returned to her seat at the edge of the ballroom, unnoticed by most. The applause had thinned. Curiosity had replaced it. Ronald smiled, warming to the sound of his own authority. People see nights like this and think they just happen, that things fall into place. He shook his head, amused. They don't. A few guests laughed, relieved to be guided back into comfort. They take work, he continued. Discipline, sacrifice, and sometimes making sure not everyone gets carried away. His eyes flicked toward Lauren again, long enough to register, short enough to deny. There's a difference between enjoying nice things and understanding what they cost, Ronald said. I think that's something we all learn eventually. This time the laughter faltered. Lauren sat still, hands folded loosely in her lap. She felt the room tilt slightly, not toward him, but away. People began to sense the imbalance. A joke that leaned too hard on truth had a way of revealing more than it intended. Patricia Brooks laughed anyway, loud and quick, as if to fill the gap. Melissa Grant smiled tightly, her phone still raised, though her eyes flicked around the room to gauge reactions. Ronald took that as encouragement. When you're married, he said, lifting his glass, you'll learn who's building and who's just along for the ride. The silence that followed was unmistakable. Someone near the back shifted uncomfortably. Another guest glanced down at their drink. A few phones lowered. Lauren did not move. The moment stretched, fragile and exposed. Ronald seemed to realize too late that he had pushed the room beyond where it wanted to go. He laughed, trying to reclaim control. I'm kidding, of course, he added. Mostly. Applause came scattered and polite. The kind people offered to end discomfort, not celebrate it. Lauren rose quietly from her chair, not to interrupt him, not to correct him, but because she understood that staying seated would be read as agreement. She walked toward the side of the room again. Her steps measured her expression, unchanged. As she passed tables, she felt eyes on her. Some curious, some sympathetic, some embarrassed on her behalf. No one spoke to her. No one stopped her. Public moments had rules, and this one had already crossed too many of them. Ronald finished his speech quickly after that, offering a final toast that landed without enthusiasm. The applause that followed was brief. The room exhaled. Music resumed. Conversations restarted, forced at first, then more naturally as people retreated into safer topics. On stage, Ronald stepped down flushed, but smiling, convinced he had recovered. He found Lauren near the corridor moments later, his tone low and irritated. "What was that?" he asked. "You couldn't just sit there." Lauren looked at him evenly. "I did. You walked out," he said, "in front of everyone." "I stood up," she replied. "There's a difference?" Ronald scoffed. "You're being dramatic." Lauren didn't argue. She had already learned that Ronald used the word dramatic to dismiss anything he didn't want to examine. Patricia joined them, her voice sharp with false concern. "Lauren, darling, people are asking questions." Lauren nodded. "That happens." Melissa hovered a few steps behind Ronald, pretending not to listen while missing nothing. Ronald leaned closer. "You know I was joking," he said. "You didn't have to make it weird." Lauren met his gaze. "You made it public." He blinked momentarily, thrown off by the simplicity of the statement. "It was a speech." "Yes," Lauren said. "It was." She turned away then, not dramatically, not angrily, simply finished. Ronald watched her go, irritation giving way to something less comfortable. Uncertainty. Across the room, Dana Whitmore stood near the bar, her posture stiff. She had been watching the exchange from a distance, tablet still in hand. When Lauren approached again, Dana spoke quietly. "I've sent the invoice to your email," she said, "and printed a copy just in case." "Thank you," Lauren replied. "I appreciate your professionalism." Dana hesitated. "For what it's worth." "I'm sorry." Lauren nodded once. "You did your job." Jason Miller approached them moments later, his camera strap slung over his shoulder lens cap back in place. "I've got everything backed up," he said, his voice neutral. "Raw files, timestamps, standard procedure." Lauren met his eyes. "Thank you." There was no further explanation. None was needed. She returned to the ballroom, not to reclaim the night, but to allow it to conclude without escalation. She spoke politely when addressed. She smiled when required. She danced once briefly with a distant cousin she barely knew. Ronald stayed close, too close, as if proximity might restore control. He laughed louder than necessary. He refilled his glass too quickly. Lauren noticed everything. When the night finally wound down and guests began to leave, the compliments grew generic, the goodbyes rushed. The party that had promised celebration now felt like an obligation everyone was relieved to exit. Ronald basked in the remnants of attention, unaware of how thin it had become. Lauren stood near the exit, thanking people for coming, her voice steady. A few guests lingered, offering soft words, sympathetic looks. She accepted them without comment. As the last guests left and the staff began to dismantle the room, Lauren paused once more beneath the lights. The space looked different now, emptier, stripped of illusion. A room returned to what it was before stories were told inside it. Ronald approached her, his tone defensive. "You embarrassed me tonight." Lauren looked at him for a long moment. "No," she said quietly. "You spoke, that's all." She turned and walked toward the exit, the echo of her steps, the only sound that followed her. The shaming had been loud. The response had been silent. And somewhere between those two things, the truth had begun to take shape. The drive home was quiet, in the way storms often are before they break. Ronald Brooks kept one hand on the steering wheel, and the other drummed against the door, a restless rhythm he didn't seem to notice. The city lights slid past the windshield in streaks of gold and white, reflected faintly in the glass like something already half-remembered. Lauren sat in the passenger seat, her coat folded neatly on her lap, her gaze forward. She wasn't thinking about what she would say. She was thinking about what she wouldn't. Ronald broke the silence first. "You could have handled that differently," he said, not looking at her. Lauren waited. Silence had always been more instructive than interruption. "I mean," he continued, "you didn't have to walk off like that. People noticed." "They noticed what you said," Lauren replied evenly. Ronald laughed once, sharp and humorless. "You're really going to act like that was some kind of attack?" Lauren turned her head slightly, just enough to look at him. "You spoke about me, in public, as if I weren't there." He scoffed. "You're being sensitive." The word landed between them, familiar and worn. Lauren didn't react. When they arrived home, Ronald headed straight for the kitchen, opening the refrigerator and closing it again without taking anything out. Lauren placed her clutch on the entry table, removed her shoes, and walked calmly toward the study. "Where are you going?" Ronald called after her. "I need to check something," she said. She closed the door behind her gently and sat at the desk. The lamp cast a focused pool of light over the surface, illuminating the same folders she had arranged weeks ago. She opened her laptop and logged in. The invoice from Dana Whitmore sat unread in her inbox. Lauren opened it, now reviewing the document line by line, though she already knew every number. She downloaded the PDF and saved it alongside the contract and payment confirmations. Then she opened her bank account. The wire transfer sat exactly where it should, dated and labeled a digital fact immune to reinterpretation. Lauren exported the statement highlighting the transaction. She noted the time. She noted the reference number. Her phone buzzed softly. A message from Jason Miller. "Hey, just confirming I've backed up the footage from tonight. Raw files and audio. Let me know if you need anything." Lauren replied with a simple thank you. She created a new folder and labeled it with the date. Inside, she placed the invoice, the bank statement, the contract, and a screenshot of Jason's message. She didn't add commentary. Facts didn't require it. From the hallway, Ronald's voice drifted closer. "So you're just going to ignore me now?" he said, opening the study door without knocking. Lauren looked up. "I'm organizing." Organizing what he asked, irritation edging into his voice. "You're acting like I committed a crime." Lauren closed her laptop halfway. "You made statements about me that weren't true." Ronald crossed his arms. "I didn't name you. You didn't have to." He stared at her, incredulous. "You're blowing this out of proportion." Lauren held his gaze. "You spoke about money, about contribution, about earning. You let people believe something false." Oh, Ronald shook his head. It was a joke. Everyone knew that. Lauren's voice remained calm. "They didn't." For a moment he looked uncertain. Then his expression hardened. "Look," he said, lowering his voice, "you don't understand the pressure I'm under right now. I needed tonight to go well." Lauren nodded. "It did. For most people." "That's not the point," Ronald snapped. "You're supposed to support me." "I did," Lauren said quietly. "I supported the event, fully." Ronald dismissed the comment with a wave of his hand. "You know what I mean." Lauren did. He meant silence. He meant compliance. He meant gratitude without acknowledgement. She reopened her laptop and turned it slightly so he could see the screen. "This is the invoice," she said. "From the venue." Ronald glanced at it briefly. "Okay." "And this," she continued, clicking to the bank statement, "is the payment confirmation." Ronald frowned. "Why are you showing me this?" Lauren met his eyes. "Because you said I didn't contribute." Ronald stared at the screen longer this time. His mouth opened, then closed again. "You paid for this?" he asked, disbelief creeping into his voice. "Yes." When Lauren answered simply, "Months ago." Ronald leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "Why would you do that without telling me?" Lauren closed the laptop. "You didn't ask." "That's not the point," he said quickly. "People think They think what you told them," Lauren replied. Silence filled the room, thicker now, charged with something new. Ronald's irritation shifted, recalibrated. "So what? You want an apology?" Lauren shook her head. "I want accuracy." He scoffed again. "You're serious about this?" "Yes." He stared at her, assessing. "You're really going to make this a thing?" Lauren's expression didn't change. "You already did." Ronald left the room abruptly, muttering under his breath. Lauren listened to his footsteps fade down the hall, then returned her attention to the screen. She added one more item to the folder, a note with timestamps. The moment Ronald took the microphone, the moment she stood, the moment she left the room. She saved the file and closed the laptop. Lauren leaned back in her chair, her breath slow and controlled. She didn't feel angry. She felt focused. Upstairs, Ronald paced, making calls. He kept short, his tone defensive. Lauren heard fragments through the ceiling's misunderstanding. Taken the wrong way, you know how things get. She let him talk. Later that night, long after Ronald had gone to bed, Lauren returned to the study. She opened her phone and scrolled to a contact she had saved years ago, but never used. Evan Caldwell. She didn't call. She didn't draft a message yet. She simply confirmed the number was still active. Then she opened a new email draft and typed a single sentence, leaving the rest blank. I need to understand my options. She didn't send it. Lauren closed the phone and sat in the quiet, the house finally still. What had happened that night wasn't just embarrassment. It was exposure. Ronald had chosen the spotlight. He had trusted volume to protect him. Lauren trusted records, and records once created had a way of moving forward on their own. By morning, Ronald Brooks had convinced himself the night had gone better than it should have. Lauren could hear it in the way he moved through the house doors, opening with renewed confidence. Coffee poured too loudly, the faint hum of a tune she recognized as his version of relief. He dressed carefully, selecting a shirt he wore when he wanted to project control. When he spoke to her, it was with the casual tone of someone who believed the worst had passed. You know, he said, adjusting his cufflinks in the hallway mirror, people were still talking about how great the place looked. Lauren sat at the kitchen table, reviewing her calendar. It did. Ronald nodded, satisfied. See, that's what matters. He leaned down to kiss her cheek. She didn't pull away. She didn't lean in either. At work, Ronald's version of the story began to circulate before lunch. He told it in fragments, adapting it to the listener. A harmless joke, a sensitive moment, a wife who took things personally. Each retelling smoothed over the sharp edges, recasting him as the reasonable one. Lauren didn't counter it. She didn't call anyone. She didn't send a single message. Instead, she worked. She contacted Rachel Nguyen at the bank, requesting an official statement documenting the transaction. Rachel responded within the hour, polite and precise, explaining the process and timeline. Lauren thanked her and marked the expected delivery date. She followed up with Dana Whitmore, asking for confirmation that the venue's internal records reflected her as the sole payer. Donna replied with a brief acknowledgement and an attached ledger entry stamped and dated. Lauren saved everything. That evening, Ronald returned home energized. You should have heard the guys at work, he said, dropping his briefcase by the door. They were impressed. One of them even asked how I managed to book that place. Lauren looked up from her laptop. What did you tell him? Ronald shrugged. That it took planning. That's true, Lauren said. Ronald smiled, missing the distinction. As the days passed, he grew bolder. He joked about the party at dinner. He referenced it on social media, posting a carefully cropped photo of himself beneath the ballroom lights, captioned, "Grateful for milestones like this." The comments were predictable. Compliments, emojis, assumptions. Lauren watched without reacting. On Thursday evening, Patricia Brooks called. I just wanted to check in. Patricia said, her voice coated in concern. Ronald mentioned that there was some tension after the party. Lauren kept her tone neutral. There was a misunderstanding. Well, Patricia replied quickly, these things happen when emotions run high. You know how men are when they're under pressure? Lauren did know. She let the silence stretch just long enough to register. I'd hate for this to become something bigger than it needs to be, Patricia continued. People talk. They do, Lauren agreed. Patricia paused. You're not planning to make a fuss, are you? Lauren smiled faintly, though Patricia couldn't see it. I'm planning to be accurate. The line went quiet for a beat. That sounds ominous, Patricia said lightly. It's not, Lauren replied. It's practical. She ended the call shortly after. Ronald noticed the shift before he could name it. Lauren was still polite, still calm, but something had changed. She no longer filled silences for him. She no longer softened statements to make them easier to accept. She spoke in clean lines, now leaving no room for reinterpretation. One night, he confronted her again. You're acting like I did something unforgivable, he said, standing in the doorway of the bedroom. Lauren looked up from her book. I'm acting like something happened. Ronald exhaled sharply. I told you I was under pressure. You don't get what it's like out there. Lauren closed the book. You don't get to decide how your words land. He scoffed. So now you're the victim. I didn't say that, Lauren replied. I said you spoke inaccurately. Ronald ran a hand through his hair, frustration flashing across his face. You paid for the venue. Fine, I get it. But do you really need to turn this into some kind of power move? Lauren met his eyes. I didn't bring it up on a microphone. The words landed harder than she raised them. Ronald stepped back momentarily, disarmed. What do you want from me? Lauren considered the question. Acknowledgement, she said, and for it not to happen again. He laughed warnedly. You're serious? Yes. He shook his head. You're really willing to risk how people see me over this? Lauren stood, closing the distance between them just enough to be clear. You already risked that. I'm just not correcting it for you. That night, Ronald made 3 phone calls Lauren overheard, each shorter than the last. His tone shifted from confident to defensive to clipped. When he went to bed, he turned away from her without comment. Lauren remained awake long after he slept. On Friday morning, the bank statement arrived. Official letterhead. Transaction details. No ambiguity. Lauren placed it into the folder. By the end of the week, Jason Miller sent another message. Just a heads up, someone reached out, asking if any footage from the anniversary was available for promotional use. I told them it's not cleared without your consent, Lauren replied promptly. Thank you. Please don't release anything, Jason responded with a single word. Understood. That was when Lauren knew the narrative was trying to move without her. Ronald had assumed the story would settle if he kept talking. He believed repetition could replace truth. He believed proximity to confidence would carry him through. Lauren believed in process. She drafted an email to Evan Caldwell that evening, attaching nothing yet, simply laying out the facts in chronological order. She reread it, once checking for tone. It was calm. It was factual. It was restrained. She sent it. Ronald noticed the change the following Monday. You've been distant, he said over breakfast. Lauren looked up. I've been busy, with what he asked, suspicion creeping in. Understanding what comes next, she replied. Ronald set his coffee down harder than necessary. You're not actually going to involve lawyers over a speech? Lauren met his gaze. I'm involving accuracy. He stared at her, searching for leverage he could no longer find. You wouldn't. Lauren didn't answer. She didn't need to. The moment Ronald had spoken on that stage, he had turned a private imbalance into a public record. The moment he dismissed it afterward, he confirmed it wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. And choices once documented invited consequences. Lauren returned to her laptop, opening the folder one more time. She reviewed each item, not with anger, but with care. This wasn't retaliation. This was containment. By the time the proof became formal, the emotional part of it had already passed. Lauren Brooks no longer felt the sharp edge of what Ronald had done. That belonged to the night itself, sealed in memory like a bruise that had already stopped aching. What remained was clarity. And clarity was something Lauren trusted. Rachel Nguyen's email arrived at precisely 9:12 a.m. The subject line was plain, transaction confirmation, official statement. Lauren opened it at her desk, the office around her humming with ordinary Monday sounds. Printers whirred, phones rang. Someone laughed down the hall. None of it touched her. The attachment was exactly what she had requested, a formal bank statement on letterhead detailing the wire transfer to the venue's account. Her full legal name, the exact amount, the date and time, the reference number. No commentary. No interpretation. Lauren saved the file, then printed one copy and placed it into a slim folder she had purchased on her lunch break. She labeled the tab neatly Venue Payment Primary Evidence. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt settled. Later that afternoon, Dana Whitmore confirmed receipt of Lauren's earlier request. per your inquiry, our internal ledger reflects that all payments associated with the Brooks anniversary event were made by Lauren Brooks. Attached is a certified copy for your records." Lauren opened the attachment, reviewed the document, and added it to the folder. The venue's logo sat at the top of the page, understated and authoritative. The numbers aligned perfectly with the bank statement. Facts agreed with facts. That mattered. That evening, Lauren met Jason Miller at a quiet cafe near the studio where he edited. She hadn't asked him to meet her. He had offered, sensing the shift without needing explanation. "I won't show you everything," Jason said as he set his laptop on the table between them. "Just enough for you to know what's there." Lauren nodded. "That's all I need." He played a short clip. Ronald at the microphone, the exact phrasing. The pause before laughter. The camera angle wide enough to capture the audience reaction, narrow enough to register Lauren standing, then walking away. Jason stopped the video. "The metadata's intact," he said. "Timestamps, audio layers. Nothing's been altered." Lauren didn't watch it again. She closed the laptop gently. "Thank you." Jason hesitated. "I filmed a lot of events like that," he said. "People don't realize how permanent words are when they're amplified." Lauren met his gaze. "Some people do." She returned home that night to find Ronald restless. He paced the living room while pretending not to. He asked about her day, then answered his own questions before she could. He mentioned work, then paused as if waiting for her to ask follow-ups. She didn't. "You've been very methodical lately," Ronald said, finally attempting levity. Lauren looked up from her notes. "I've always been methodical. Not like this," he replied. She closed the folder and set it aside. "This requires it." Ronald's jaw tightened. "You're really going through with this?" "I'm documenting," Lauren corrected. He scoffed. "You're collecting ammo." Lauren stood meeting him eye level. "You went on stage without facts. I'm correcting the imbalance." Ronald shook his head, frustrated. "I already told people it was a misunderstanding." Lauren's voice remained calm. "You told them a different story. That's how things work," he snapped. "You smooth it over." Lauren didn't raise her voice. "You rewrite it." The distinction hung between them. Ronald turned away, running his hands through his hair. "You know this could hurt me." Lauren nodded. "I know." He looked back at her eyes, searching for something: hesitation, guilt, softness. She gave him none. "This doesn't have to be public," she said. "It has to be accurate." He laughed bitterly. "You think accuracy protects anyone?" Lauren thought of the invoice, the ledger, the timestamps. "Yes," she said, "eventually." That night, she organized the evidence into a single digital packet. Each document labeled, each file dated, each source verified. She added a simple timeline noting when the contract was signed, when payments were made, when statements were spoken publicly. She removed adjectives. She removed emotion. What remained was unassailable. She sent the packet to Evan Caldwell with a brief note. "This is the complete record so far. Let me know what you recommend as next steps." Evan replied the following morning. "Thank you. This is very clear. We should talk." They met 2 days later in Evan's office, a space designed for calm rather than intimidation. No dark wood, no towering shelves, just clean lines, soft light, and a large table between them. Evan reviewed the documents carefully, not rushing, not reacting. When he spoke publicly, Evan said at last he created a record, not just socially, but potentially legally. Lauren listened. "The key here," Evan continued, "is that you're not responding emotionally. You're responding procedurally. That matters." "What are my options?" Lauren asked. Evan laid them out plainly. A formal demand letter requesting correction and acknowledgement. Preservation notices to ensure no footage or communications were altered. Clear boundaries around future representations of financial contributions. "And if he refuses?" Lauren asked. Evan met her eyes. "Then the documentation speaks for itself." Lauren nodded once. When she returned home, Ronald was waiting. "You went to see a lawyer," he said, not asking. Lauren removed her coat. "Yes." He laughed sharply. "Unbelievable." She looked at him. You gave a speech. This is my response. Ronald stepped closer. You're doing this to punish me. Lauren shook her head. I'm doing this to stop it. Stop what being misrepresented. The word landed heavier than accusation. Ronald opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time, he seemed to realize there was no argument left, only consequences. Lauren picked up her folder and moved toward the bedroom. I'll let you know what happens next, she said calmly. She closed the door behind her and sat on the edge of the bed, the folder resting beside her like something that had always belonged there. The proof was no longer just hers. It had entered a system. And systems once engaged did not bend for ego. The reason Ronald Brooks had needed the lie didn't reveal itself all at once. It surfaced in fragments, half-finished sentences, careful silences, and the sudden way people stopped asking certain questions. Lauren noticed the shift before Ronald did. It began with a meeting request that arrived on Ronald's phone late one evening, the screen lighting up the room as he set it face down on the table. He didn't mention it. He didn't need to. Lauren recognized the tightness in his shoulders, the way his jaw worked, as if rehearsing answers no one had asked yet. At dinner, he talked too much. There's a lot happening at work, he said, spearing a piece of chicken he didn't eat. Restructuring, visibility. You know how these things go. Lauren nodded. I do. He glanced at her, suspicious of the agreement. Then you know why that night mattered. Yes, Lauren said. I know why you wanted it to matter. Ronald exhaled, relieved by what he mistook for understanding. Exactly. It wasn't just about us. It was strategic. Lauren didn't respond. Strategy was only impressive when it was honest. Over the next week, the pieces began to align. Lauren overheard calls from the other room, Ronald's voice lowered, careful, never quite committing to specifics. He spoke about client impressions, about leadership presence, about how the anniversary event had set the tone. He never mentioned her. One afternoon, as Lauren was organizing documents at the desk, a notification popped up on her shared calendar, an entry Ronald had forgotten to make private. Dinner, executive team, potential promotion discussion. The date was 2 days after the anniversary. Lauren stared at the screen, the realization settling quietly. The party hadn't just been a celebration. It had been a display. A carefully staged backdrop meant to reinforce an image Ronald was selling of stability, of success, of control. The implication had been subtle, but clear. A man who could host a night like that was a man worth betting on. And that was where Lauren had complicated the story. By paying for the venue, she hadn't just supported the event. She had underwritten the illusion. An illusion Ronald had been willing to let others attribute to him, even if it required diminishing her publicly. That evening, Melissa Grant's name came up again. Ronald mentioned her casually, too casually. Melissa said some of the partners were impressed by the event, he said, watching Lauren's reaction. She's been helpful. Lauren looked up from her notes. In what way? Ronald shrugged. She knows how to position things. Lauren considered that. Positioning requires truth eventually. Ronald laughed, dismissive. Not always. The next day, Lauren received an email she hadn't expected. It was forwarded from a colleague who worked adjacent to Ronald's department, someone Lauren knew socially but hadn't spoken to in months. Hey, I wasn't sure if this was appropriate to share, but I thought you should know. Your anniversary event came up in a meeting. Some assumptions were made. There were no details attached, no accusations, just that. Lauren thanked the sender and closed the email. She didn't need specifics. She already understood the shape of it. Ronald had let people believe he had paid for the venue because it supported the version of himself he was pitching, a version that required him to be the sole architect of their success, a version that couldn't accommodate a wife who quietly handled logistics better than he did. The lie wasn't about money. It was about control. Lauren shared the email with Evan Caldwell later that week during a brief follow-up call. This confirms motive, Evan said after reading it. Not legally essential, but contextually important. So he needed the credit, Lauren said. He needed the narrative Evan corrected. Credit follows narrative. Lauren ended the call and sat in the quiet of her office for a long moment. The clarity brought no satisfaction, only a deeper understanding of how deliberately the moment had been engineered. That night, Ronald came home late. He loosened his tie as he entered his expression, tight eyes restless. "We need to talk," he said. Lauren closed her laptop. "Okay." He paced the room once, then stopped. "Things are complicated right now." Lauren waited. "They're reviewing leadership tracks," he continued. "And optics matter. People remember impressions." Lauren nodded. "They do." Ronald looked at her sharply. "You didn't say anything, did you? To anyone?" Lauren met his gaze. "I didn't need to." "That's not an answer," he said, irritation creeping in. "It is," Lauren replied, "because I didn't say anything false." Ronald ran a hand over his face. "You don't understand what's at stake." Lauren stood. "I understand exactly what was at stake for you that night." He stared at her. "Then why are you doing this?" Lauren's voice was steady. "Because you chose to secure your position by erasing mine." Silence filled the room, thick and heavy. Ronald's frustration finally cracked, revealing something closer to fear. "You're going to ruin this for me." Lauren shook her head. "You're asking me to preserve something built on misrepresentation." "It's how the world works," Ronald snapped. "Then the world can correct itself," Lauren said. He laughed bitterly. "You think the truth always wins." Lauren thought of the documents, the ledger, the footage, the timestamps. "I think it eventually arrives." The following morning, Melissa Grant called Ronald during breakfast. Lauren didn't hear the conversation, but she saw the effect it had. His shoulders slumped. His voice dropped. When he hung up, he stared at the wall for a long moment. What Lauren asked, not unkindly. "They're asking questions," Ronald said quietly. Lauren nodded. "They should." He looked at her, something close to panic in his eyes. "She said they want clarification about the event." Lauren didn't respond. "What if I explain?" Ronald pressed. "What if I just clear it up?" Lauren considered the question. "That would require accuracy." He swallowed. "And if I don't?" Lauren picked up her folder already prepared. "Then the record will." Ronald watched her, finally grasping the shape of what he had set in motion. The party he had used as leverage had become evidence. The joke he had hidden behind had become motive. Lauren wasn't dismantling his career. She wasn't seeking to humiliate him in return. She was stepping out of the lie. And in doing so, she was forcing the truth to stand on its own. That afternoon, Evan Caldwell sent a draft of the demand letter. It was restrained, precise, and devastating in its simplicity. It outlined the public statements, made the documented facts that contradicted them, and the request for correction. Lauren read it carefully, then approved it without edits. When Ronald received the letter 2 days later, he didn't speak for hours. Lauren watched him read it at the kitchen table, his face changing as he reached the attachments. The invoice, the bank statement, the ledger, the still frame from Jason's footage, time-stamped and silent. He looked up at her finally. "You planned this," he said, his voice hollow. Lauren shook her head. "I prepared." The distinction mattered. Ronald returned to the letter, reading it again, slower this time. The narrative he had relied on, confidence, repetition, dismissal, had no place to stand. Because the truth didn't argue. It waited. The office of Evan Caldwell was designed to lower voices. It wasn't imposing. There were no dark wood panels or intimidating shelves lined with leather-bound volumes. The walls were light, the windows uncovered. A space meant for clarity, not drama. Lauren noticed that immediately and appreciated it. Evan reviewed the packet she had assembled without interruption. He didn't react when he reached the invoice. He didn't pause at the bank statement. He studied the timeline with the focus of someone who trusted sequence more than sentiment. "You've done most of the work already," he said at last. Lauren sat upright, hands folded in her lap. "I wanted to be sure." Evan nodded. "You are." He slid the folder back across the table. "What matters here isn't just that you paid for the venue. It's that your husband made a public statement that implied the opposite. in front of witnesses, on record. Lauren listened without comment. That creates exposure. Evan continued, not only in terms of reputation, but in terms of misrepresentation, especially if those statements were leveraged professionally. Lauren thought of the forwarded email, of the calendar entry. They were. Evan's expression didn't change. Then our goal is precision. Not punishment, Lauren said. Exactly, Evan replied. We're not here to escalate emotion. We're here to correct the record and protect you from future mischaracterization. He outlined the steps methodically. First, a formal demand letter, calm in tone, specific in content. No accusations beyond what could be proven. It would document the statements made, attach the contradictory evidence, and request a written correction. Second, preservation notices. One to the venue, one to the photographer, one to Ronald himself. Not hostile procedural. A reminder that records should remain intact. Third, boundaries. Clear expectations about how financial contributions were represented, going forward both publicly and privately. And if he refuses, Lauren asked. Evan folded his hands. Then the documentation stands. And if the misrepresentation continues, your options expand. Lauren nodded. She felt no rush, only alignment. What about privacy, she asked. I don't want this to turn into a spectacle. Evan smiled faintly. That's the advantage of doing things correctly. You don't need to be loud. Systems speak quietly, but they carry weight. When Lauren returned home that evening, Ronald was already there. He sat at the kitchen table, the demand letter spread in front of him, attachments neatly stacked, as if order might soften their meaning. He looked up as she entered, eyes tired, defensive energy stripped away. You didn't warn me, he said. Lauren removed her coat. You didn't warn me before the speech. He looked away. This could have been handled privately. It is private, Lauren replied. It's formal. Ronald laughed without humor. You know what this looks like. Lauren met his gaze. It looks like correction. He gestured to the papers. You're threatening me. I'm documenting, Lauren said, steady. There's a difference. Ronald leaned back, rubbing his temples. You don't understand how this affects me. Lauren sat across from him. You don't understand how long it's already affected me. He frowned. That's not fair. Lauren didn't argue fairness. You spoke about me as if I weren't present, as if my contribution was incidental, as if accuracy didn't matter. Ronald's jaw tightened. I was under pressure. Lauren nodded. So was I. Silence stretched between them, dense and revealing. What do you want? Ronald asked finally. Lauren answered without hesitation. A written correction, no deflection, no jokes, and an acknowledgement that I paid for the venue. Ronald scoffed weakly. You want me to embarrass myself? I want you to be accurate, Lauren said. Embarrassment is optional. He stared at the letter again. And if I don't, Lauren's voice remained calm. Then the record exists without your input. Ronald stood abruptly, pacing. You're really willing to let this follow me? Lauren watched him. You already let it follow me. That night, Ronald didn't sleep. Lauren knew because she heard him moving through the house at irregular hours, the soft glow of his phone. Lighting up hallways, the murmur of calls, he ended quickly. By morning, the dynamic had shifted. Ronald wasn't angry anymore. He was cautious. He asked questions now, measured ones. What if I phrase it this way? What if I say we handled it together? What if I don't mention specifics? Lauren answered each calmly. That wouldn't be accurate. That's vague. That still misrepresents. He grew frustrated. You're impossible. Lauren didn't rise to it. I'm consistent. The preservation notices went out that afternoon. Dana Whitmore acknowledged receipt immediately, professionalism intact. Jason Miller responded with a brief confirmation and reassurance that all files were securely stored. Ronald received his copy and read it twice. His expression hard to read. You're serious about this, he said. Yes, Lauren replied. That evening, Patricia Brooks called. "I don't like the direction this is going," Patricia said, skipping pleasantries. "You're creating unnecessary problems." Lauren listened. "Ronald is under scrutiny." Patricia continued. "You could ease this." Lauren's voice was even. "By pretending something that isn't true." Patricia huffed. "By being supportive." Lauren paused. "Support doesn't require silence." Patricia's tone sharpened. "You're damaging your marriage." Lauren considered that. The damage happened on the stage. The call ended shortly after. Ronald watched Lauren from across the room as she filed the confirmations. "You've changed," he said quietly. Lauren looked up. "No, I've stopped compensating." That night, Lauren drafted the final version of the correction she expected Ronald to issue. It was brief, direct, free of apology or explanation. "I want to clarify a statement I made at our anniversary event. The venue and related expenses were paid for by my wife, Lauren Brooks. Any implication otherwise was inaccurate." She saved the draft and sent it to Evan for review. Evan responded within the hour. "This is appropriate." Lauren forwarded it to Ronald without comment. He stared at the message for a long time before responding. "I need time," he wrote. Lauren didn't reply, and time had already been taken. What followed wasn't a confrontation. It was a narrowing. Each option Ronald considered closed itself once accuracy was applied. Each attempt to soften the truth only highlighted why the truth mattered. Lauren moved through her days with steady purpose. She didn't explain herself to friends. She didn't post online. She didn't vent. She let procedure do what emotion could not. Because the moment Ronald had chosen to speak publicly, he had entered a system larger than either of them. One that valued records over charisma, consistency over volume. And Lauren, for the first time in years, was no longer carrying the weight of keeping things smooth. She was letting them be correct. The demand letter changed the temperature of the house. It didn't raise voices. It didn't spark arguments. Instead, it introduced something far more unsettling to Ronald Brooks' constraint. Every conversation now had edges. Every statement required consideration. The easy confidence he had relied on began to fracture under the weight of being observed not by people, but by paper. Lauren noticed the shift immediately. Ronald stopped narrating his day. He stopped joking about work. He began asking questions, before speaking as if testing the air for resistance. "Evan's letter," he said one evening, holding the pages loosely in his hand. "It doesn't leave much room." "That's intentional," Lauren replied. He studied her face, searching for hesitation. "You really won't soften it?" Lauren shook her head. "Accuracy doesn't need softening." Ronald exhaled slowly. "You know they'll ask me about this." "They already are," Lauren said. That night, Ronald tried a different approach. He sat beside her on the couch, his posture less defensive, his voice lowered. "I didn't mean to humiliate you." Lauren didn't pull away. She also didn't lean in. Intent doesn't erase impact. He nodded as if conceding the point. "I'll acknowledge it privately, to the people who matter." Lauren met his gaze. "You made it public." Ronald's jaw tightened. "You want me to make a statement?" "Yes." He looked away. "That could cost me." Lauren's voice remained calm. "So did what you said." The following morning, Evan Caldwell sent confirmation that the preservation notices had been acknowledged. Everything was now locked into place: footage, emails, ledgers, communications. The window for revision had closed. Lauren felt no satisfaction in that, only a sense of inevitability. Ronald received a call at work just before lunch. Lauren didn't hear the conversation, but she recognized the aftermath. When he came home early, his movements abrupt, his face pale. "They want a meeting," he said, pacing the living room. "HR and someone from compliance." Lauren nodded. "That's expected." He stopped pacing. They asked about the event. Lauren waited. "I told them it was a misunderstanding," Ronald continued. "That the joke landed wrong." And Lauren asked. "They want clarification," he said. "In writing." Silence settled between them, heavy and decisive. Ronald looked at her, something like desperation breaking through his composure. "If I do this, if I issue a correction, will you stop?" Lauren considered the question carefully. "I'll stop when the record is accurate." He swallowed. "You won't push it further, I won't escalate," Lauren said. "I'll complete." The distinction mattered. That afternoon, Ronald drafted 3 versions of a statement. Each one avoided the central fact. Each one blurred responsibility. Each one attempted to preserve his image at the expense of clarity. Lauren reviewed them without comment, then slid them back across the table. "These don't work," she said simply. Ronald snapped. "You're being rigid, I'm being precise," Lauren replied. By evening, Ronald's frustration turned outward. Patricia Brooks arrived unannounced, her expression tight, her posture rigid with indignation. "This has gone far enough," Patricia said the moment she stepped inside. "You're putting Ronald in an impossible position." Lauren remained seated. He put himself there. Patricia scoffed. "You're his wife. You're supposed to protect him." Lauren looked up. From consequences, Patricia's eyes flashed. From humiliation. Lauren's voice was steady. Humiliation came from speaking falsely in public. Patricia turned to Ronald. "Are you just going to let this happen?" Ronald said nothing. Patricia's tone sharpened. "This family doesn't air its dirty laundry." Lauren met her gaze. "Then it shouldn't create public records." The room went quiet. Patricia left shortly after her departure, abrupt and wordless. That night, Ronald sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the letter again. Lauren watched from the doorway, her presence neither confrontational nor comforting. Simply there. "What if I apologize?" Ronald asked quietly, privately, "To you." Lauren stepped forward. "Apologies don't correct records." He rubbed his face, exhausted. "You're forcing my hand." Lauren shook her head. "I'm removing your cover." The following morning, Ronald sent the statement. It was brief, it was direct. It said exactly what Lauren had required, and nothing more. Within hours, the response came. HR acknowledged receipt. Compliance requested follow-up documentation. A partner replied with a simple, "Thank you for clarifying." No one applauded. No one attacked. The world adjusted. Ronald came home that evening, subdued, the weight of the day evident in his posture. "It's done," he said. Lauren nodded. "Then the record is accurate." He watched her searching for relief, for reconciliation, for some sign that the cost had been worth it. She offered none of those things. What she offered was closure. That night, Lauren organized the final confirmations and added them to the folder. She labeled the section "Correction Issued" and closed it. The demand letter had done its work not through force, but through structure. It hadn't punished, it had constrained. It had required truth to take up space where convenience once lived. Ronald sat across from her, quieter now, smaller in ways she hadn't anticipated. The man who had once relied on performance found himself limited by documentation. Lauren felt no triumph, only clarity. Because justice, she understood now, wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It arrived through procedure, through insistence, through the refusal to let false narratives stand unchallenged. And once it arrived, it didn't need to stay. The systems responded quietly. There were no dramatic announcements, no public reckonings. What followed the correction was subtler and far more irreversible. The kind of shift that happened behind closed doors in inboxes and meeting rooms where impressions hardened into conclusions. Lauren Brooks noticed it first in the absence of noise. Ronald stopped taking calls in the living room. He retreated to the spare bedroom for meetings, closing the door with a care that suggested he no longer trusted the walls. His voice, once buoyant with certainty, flattened into something measured and cautious. At breakfast, he scrolled through his phone without speaking. When Lauren asked a practical question about schedules, about logistics, he answered briefly, then returned to silence. The correction had been issued. The record was accurate. And now the consequences moved on their own. Ronald's workplace did not accuse him. It didn't need to. Accuracy had done what accusation could not. It reframed him. Where he had once been perceived as confident, he he was now careful. Where he had been persuasive, he was now precise to the point of restraint. A meeting request arrived late Wednesday afternoon, this time marked follow-up discussion. No emojis, no casual language. Ronald read it twice, then set the phone down. "They're asking for documentation," he said quietly. Lauren nodded. "They will. Not just about the event," he added. "About other representations." Lauren said nothing. The following days unfolded in a pattern Lauren recognized from other systems she had observed at work. Once a discrepancy surfaced, everything nearby came under review. Not because people were vindictive, but because trust, once interrupted, required verification to resume. Ronald spent hours assembling emails, clarifying timelines, explaining decisions he had once made confidently without notes. He spoke less about future plans, more about alignment, about transparency. Melissa Grant stopped calling. Lauren noticed when Ronald checked his phone and frowned at refreshing messages that didn't arrive. When she finally came up in conversation, it was only to say, "She's busy," in a tone that suggested he understood what that really meant. Patricia Brooks tried once more to intervene. She invited Lauren to lunch, her tone carefully pleasant, as if resetting might undo what had already settled. "You've made your point," Patricia said after the menus were cleared. Ronald's corrected the record. "Surely that's enough." Lauren folded her napkin. "It is enough." Patricia exhaled, relieved. "Then we can move on." Lauren met her gaze. "We can proceed." Patricia frowned. "What's the difference?" Lauren considered the question. "Moving on requires forgetting. Proceeding requires accuracy." Patricia's lips thinned. "You're very exacting." "Yes," Lauren said. "I am." The lunch ended shortly after. At home, Lauren's life grew quieter in ways that surprised her. Not lonelier, quieter. She stopped compensating for Ronald's moods. She stopped filling gaps in conversation. She allowed pauses to exist without smoothing them over. Ronald felt the absence of that labor acutely. "You don't talk to me anymore," he said one night, frustration creeping back into his voice. Lauren looked up from her book. "I talk when there's something to say. You used to ask about my day." Lauren closed the book. "You used to include me in your narrative. The words weren't sharp. They didn't need to be." Ronald sat down heavily. "I feel like I'm being punished." Lauren shook her head. "You're being recalibrated." He laughed bitterly. "That's a nice way to put it." "It's an accurate way," she replied. The final confirmation from compliance arrived the following week. It was brief, neutral, and final. "Thank you for the clarification provided. We consider the matter resolved." Resolved did not mean forgotten. Lauren understood that. It meant the system had absorbed the correction and adjusted accordingly. Ronald came home that evening with a tight smile. "It's over," he said. Lauren nodded. "Then it's complete." He watched her, something searching in his expression. "You're not relieved." "I am," Lauren said. "Just not the way you expect." Relief for her wasn't the absence of consequence, it was the absence of distortion. That night, Lauren packed a small overnight bag. Ronald noticed from the doorway. "What's that? I'm staying with a friend for a few days," she said calmly. His eyes widened. "Because of this, because of everything," Lauren replied. He stepped closer. "You're leaving." Lauren zipped the bag. "I'm creating space. For what? For reality to settle." He looked stunned. "You can't just walk away." Lauren met his gaze. "I'm not walking away from facts. I'm stepping away from performance." She left before he could respond. At her friend's apartment, Lauren slept deeply for the first time in weeks. The quiet there was different, unburdened, neutral. She woke early, made coffee, and watched the city come alive without needing to interpret it for anyone else. Messages from Ronald arrived sporadically. Apologies, explanations, defensiveness, then silence. Lauren read them without responding. She wasn't withholding, she was deciding. When she returned home 3 days later, the house felt unfamiliar, not hostile, emptied. Ronald moved around her cautiously as if unsure which version of himself she would accept. Lauren unpacked slowly, deliberately. That evening, she sat at the kitchen table and opened the folder one last time. She reviewed the sequence from beginning to end: the contract, the payments, the speech, the correction. Then she closed it and placed it in a drawer. The system had responded. The record was clean. What remained was choice. Ronald stood across from her, hands clasped. "I didn't think it would go this far." Lauren looked at him with calm clarity. "I did." "Why didn't you stop me?" he asked quietly. Lauren answered honestly. "Because you needed to hear yourself." Silence stretched between them, not tense, but resolved. The consequences had arrived without spectacle. No one had been publicly shamed in return. No victory had been declared. Just a recalibration of truth. And for Lauren, that was enough to change everything. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday morning, and it carried none of the weight Ronald had once associated with important moments. There was no stage, no microphone, no applause waiting to be claimed. Just a conference room with glass walls, a long table, and a neutral hum from the air conditioning that made every pause audible. Lauren Brooks arrived 10 minutes early. She chose a seat near the end of the table, placed her folder in front of her, and waited. She had dressed simply, nothing that signaled authority, nothing that invited commentary. She didn't need either. The documents did that work for her. Ronald arrived a few minutes later, flanked by a representative from HR and a compliance officer he had never met before, Mercer. His smile appeared briefly, then disappeared when he saw Lauren already seated, composed, unreadable. Evan Caldwell joined last, nodding once to Lauren before taking his place beside her. He said nothing at first. Neither did she. The meeting began without ceremony. The compliance officer outlined the purpose: to finalize understanding, confirm accuracy, and close the loop. The language was careful, procedural, designed to prevent escalation rather than provoke it. Lauren listened. Ronald spoke when prompted. His tone measured, his words chosen carefully. He repeated the correction he had already issued, acknowledging that his earlier statements at the anniversary event had been inaccurate. No one interrupted him. When he finished, the compliance officer turned to Lauren. "Is there anything you'd like to add?" she asked. Lauren paused, not because she was uncertain, but because she understood the power of restraint. "Yes," she said calmly. "I'd like the record to reflect that my financial contribution was not incidental. It was complete." The compliance officer nodded. Noted. Evan slid the folder across the table, opening it to a single page, the ledger from the venue stamped and certified. "This confirms payment in full," Evan said, "by Lauren Brooks." The compliance officer reviewed it. So did HR. Ronald stared at the document without touching it. No one asked Lauren how it felt. No one asked Ronald why he had said what he said. Motives were irrelevant now. Only facts mattered. The meeting concluded in under 40 minutes. As they stood to leave, the HR representative spoke one final sentence. "Thank you for your cooperation. We consider this matter documented and resolved." Resolved. The word landed with a quiet finality. Outside the building, Ronald stopped Lauren near the elevators. "You didn't have to bring the ledger," he said, his voice low. Lauren looked at him. "I did. You already had the correction. I needed completion," she replied. He studied her, something like resignation settling into his features. "You always know when to stop." Lauren considered that. "I know when to finish." They parted without further comment. That afternoon, Lauren returned to her office and sat at her desk without opening her laptop. She looked out the window instead, watching people move through the city below, busy, purposeful, unaware of the small recalibration that had just taken place. Her phone buzzed once. A message from Jason Miller. "I was notified the footage is officially archived. No further action needed." Lauren replied with a simple thank you. Huh. Another message arrived shortly after this one from Dana Whitmore. "We've closed out the event file. Wishing you the best." Lauren closed her phone and placed it face down. That evening, she went home earlier than usual. Ronald was already there, sitting on the couch, his jacket draped over the arm, his tie loosened but not removed. He looked up as she entered, his expression tentative. "How did it go?" he asked. "It concluded," Lauren replied. He nodded, absorbing the phrasing. They didn't say much after. "They don't need to," she said. Ronald hesitated, then spoke. "I didn't realize how exposed I was." Lauren set her bag down. "Exposure isn't new. You just hadn't felt it before." He flinched slightly, then steadied himself. "I'm trying to understand what happens now." Lauren met his eyes. "That depends on what you do next." He leaned forward. "I apologized." "Yes," Lauren said. "You corrected the record." "I meant it," he added quickly. Lauren didn't doubt that. She simply didn't anchor herself to it. "What about us?" Ronald asked. Lauren took a slow breath. "Us isn't a document. It doesn't resolve in a meeting." He nodded, defeated. "So that's it for today," Lauren said. She went to the bedroom and began packing again, this time with intention. Ronald watched from the doorway, silent. When she finished, she turned to him. "I'm not angry," she said. "I'm clear." He swallowed. "Are you leaving?" Lauren zipped the bag. "I'm choosing myself." He didn't argue. He didn't follow her. Lauren stepped out into the evening air and felt something she hadn't expected: lightness. Not relief exactly, more like alignment. The quiet satisfaction of having acted in accordance with her values, without spectacle, without cruelty. The story had reached its turning point, without a shout, without a confrontation that required witnesses. The evidence had spoken. The truth had been acknowledged. And Lauren had not needed to raise her voice once. The resolution did not arrive all at once. It came in increments, measured, procedural, almost anticlimactic in the way real endings often were. There were no dramatic confrontations left to be had, no final speeches waiting to be delivered. The stage Ronald had once relied on no longer existed. What remained were documents, boundaries, and decisions. Lauren Brooks spent the first week after the meeting moving deliberately through the practicalities of separation. She did not rush. She did not dramatize. She approached it the same way she had approached the venue contract months earlier, with clarity and foresight. She met with Evan Caldwell again, this time not to correct a public record, but to define a private future. "We'll keep this clean," Evan said, reviewing the notes she had prepared. "No unnecessary escalation. Asset separation, financial clarity, written agreements." Lauren nodded. "That's all I want." They discussed timelines, accounts, responsibilities. Evan asked if she wanted to pursue anything further related to reputational harm. "No," Lauren said without hesitation. "The correction stands. I don't want leverage. I want closure." Evan smiled faintly. "That's rare." Lauren didn't respond. Rarity wasn't her concern. At home, Ronald moved through the days like someone learning a new layout of a familiar room. He no longer assumed Lauren would remind him of things. He no longer spoke as if his interpretation would be accepted without question. The recalibration had reached him. One evening, he handed her a check without comment. The amount matched the venue cost exactly. "I reimbursed you," he said quietly. "For the event." Lauren looked at the check, then at him. "Thank you." There was no bitterness in her voice, no satisfaction either. "It's not an apology," Ronald added quickly. "It's just right." Lauren nodded. "That's enough." He hesitated. "Do you hate me?" Lauren considered the question honestly. "No." He looked relieved. "I'm disappointed," she added. The relief faded. They finalized the separation terms without hostility. There were moments of tension inevitable in any dismantling, but no cruelty. Ronald didn't fight for optics anymore. He didn't posture. He complied. The systems that had corrected the record had taught him something he hadn't learned before: resistance without evidence only deepened loss. At work, Ronald's trajectory shifted subtly but unmistakably. He wasn't fired. He wasn't publicly reprimanded. But doors that had once seemed open slowed in their movement. Opportunities required more vetting. Meetings came with more oversight. He adjusted. He had to. Melissa Grant's name disappeared from conversation entirely. When Lauren heard about her months later, it was only in passing, a transfer as a lateral move, nothing dramatic. The ecosystem had realigned. Lauren moved into a new apartment across town, smaller than the house she had shared with Ronald, but brighter. The windows faced east. The mornings felt intentional. She furnished it slowly, purposefully. Nothing extravagant, nothing symbolic, just things that worked. Friends visited. They asked careful questions. Lauren answered what she chose to answer. "I'm okay," she said when asked how she felt. And she was. One afternoon, weeks later, Lauren received a final email from the venue, an automated notice, confirming the file had been archived and closed permanently. She smiled faintly, then deleted it. That chapter was finished. Ronald reached out once more, months after the separation had been formalized. The message was brief. "I've been thinking about that night, about what I said. I understand now why you didn't argue." Lauren read it twice, then replied, "I wasn't silent to punish you. I was silent to hear myself clearly." He didn't respond. She didn't expect him to. The anniversary date came and went the following year without recognition. Lauren spent it hiking with a friend, the city far below, the air clear and cool. There were no toasts, no speeches, no audience, just presence. As she stood at the overlook, Lauren thought briefly of the ballroom, the lights, the applause, the microphone. She felt no pull toward it, no urge to rewrite the moment. What mattered wasn't that Ronald had been corrected. What mattered was that she had not abandoned herself to protect a false narrative. She had chosen dignity over volume, accuracy over performance, procedure over spectacle. And she had walked away without needing the last word. That was the resolution. The quiet that followed was not empty. It was structured, intentional, and earned. Lauren Brooks learned this slowly, in the weeks after everything had been finalized, when there were no more documents to file, and no more conversations to navigate. The systems had done their work. The legal threads had been tied off cleanly. What remained was the unfamiliar task of living without correction in mind. Her mornings settled into a rhythm that belonged entirely to her. She woke early, not out of urgency but habit, and watched the light shift across the walls of her new apartment. The space felt neutral in a way the old house never had. No echoes of someone else's expectations, no need to anticipate reactions. She made coffee, she read. She left the apartment without checking whether anyone else needed something from her first. At work, colleagues noticed the change before she did. Lauren spoke with more ease now, not more volume, but more certainty. She no longer softened statements that were already accurate. She no longer took on responsibility for smoothing over other people's discomfort. She wasn't guarded. She was clear. One afternoon, months after the anniversary event, Lauren received an invitation to a professional gathering at a different venue. Smaller, quieter, deliberately understated. She accepted without hesitation. On the night of the event, she arrived alone. The room was nothing like the ballroom from before. No grand entrances, no elevated stage. People stood in loose circles, speaking without amplification. Lauren moved through the space, comfortably engaging when she wanted, stepping away when she didn't. At one point, she found herself near the back of the room, observing rather than participating. It was a familiar position, but this time, it didn't feel like retreat. It felt like choice. She smiled at that realization. Later, as she stepped outside into the cool evening air, Lauren checked her phone and saw a message from a number she recognized immediately. Ronald. She didn't open it right away. She walked a few steps down the sidewalk, listening to the city settle around her. The distant hum of traffic, the low murmur of conversations spilling out of restaurants, the steady rhythm of movement that didn't require her attention. When she finally read the message, it was shorter than the others had been. "I'm learning how much I relied on being seen." Lauren didn't respond. Not because the message was unwelcome. Not because it was insincere. but because it no longer required her participation. She put the phone back in her pocket and continued walking. That was the true ending of it all. Not the meeting, not the correction, not the reimbursement. Those had been necessary, but they were procedural. They belonged to systems. This belonged to her. Lauren had left without spectacle, without retaliation, without needing anyone else to acknowledge her strength. She had trusted the process. She had trusted the record. And when the moment came to choose herself fully, she had done so quietly. In time, the anniversary event became something people barely remembered. Stories softened, details blurred. The microphone moment faded into trivia. But Lauren remembered it clearly, not with bitterness, but with understanding. That was the night she stopped absorbing misrepresentation as the cost of keeping peace. That was the night she learned that silence, when chosen deliberately, could be a form of authorship. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't embarrassed anyone in return. She hadn't chased vindication. She had documented. She had corrected. She had stepped away with dignity intact. And that dignity stayed with her long after everything else had been archived and closed. Some lessons don't arrive with noise. They arrive slowly, quietly, and they stay longer because of it. What Lauren's story ultimately shows us is that strength is not always visible in the moment it matters most. Sometimes it looks like restraint. Sometimes it looks like preparation. Sometimes it looks like choosing not to argue when arguing would only blur the truth. In a world that often rewards the loudest voice, Lauren chose something far more difficult: consistency. She did not rush to defend herself when she was publicly diminished. She did not weaponize anger or seek validation from the crowd. Instead, she trusted something deeper and more durable: the record. She trusted that truth, when documented and allowed to move through proper channels, does not need performance to be believed. It only needs time. Many of us are taught that silence equals weakness, that if we don't respond immediately, we lose. But this story gently challenges that idea. Silence, when chosen consciously, can be a form of self-respect. Preparation can be a form of self-love. Walking away without humiliating someone in return can be a form of moral clarity. Lauren didn't win by destroying someone else. She won by refusing to destroy herself in the process of being misunderstood. She corrected what was false, protected what mattered, and then stepped forward into a life that no longer required her to manage someone else's image at the expense of her own truth. And that may be the most powerful lesson of all. You don't owe anyone your silence to protect their narrative. You don't owe anyone your dignity to preserve their comfort. And you don't need an audience to choose yourself. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What part stayed with you the longest? Have you ever chosen quiet strength over immediate reaction? Share your reflections in the comments. Your perspective might help someone else feel less alone. And if you appreciate stories that honor patience, integrity, and emotional realism, consider subscribing to the channel. Not for drama, but for stories that remind us that doing the right thing, even quietly, still matters.